Herr Botschafter.
Ambassador, chère Florence Parly, ladies and gentlemen. 4 years ago, I stood here for the first time facing this conference. At the time, the Federal President, the Federal Minister of Defense and Foreign Affairs, and myself had the same message. Germany must assume greater responsibility in the area of foreign and security policy. Back then, in February 2014, we had no idea how soon the overall security situation would put us to the test. Because shortly after the conference, the situation began to deteriorate rapidly. So many people were interested in how Germany would respond, and we took on responsibility. Germany and France set up an initial political framework aimed at resolving the conflict in Ukraine, the Minsk agreements. We supported the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in eastern Ukraine. We strengthened NATO's eastern flank with the new VJTF, the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, and the air policing mission over the Baltic states. From day one, we have shown our commitment to our enhanced forward presence in Lithuania. We strengthened our involvement in the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. We have participated in the fight against ISIL by providing reconnaissance flights, refueling aircraft, and by equipping and training the Peshmerga. We have continuously increased our commitment in Mali, especially as part of the MINUSMA mission. From day one, we have taken action in the Sophia operation and other NATO activities in the Aegean Sea. So, in other words, we have been taking action together with our transatlantic and European partners. Last year, I opened this conference with my colleague Jim Mattis, and today it is my honor and my privilege to open the conference with my colleague from France, Florence Parly. Both cases are an expression of German politics. We want to remain transatlantic, but we also want to become more European. Ambassador, we want to enable Europe to carry more weight in terms of military power too, so that Europe can become more independent and self-reliant, and ultimately that includes NATO. We have made a start. In December last year, we launched the European Defence Union, at last. So, in a way, we have embarked on a political journey. We intend to work on an army of Europeans. We have the European Defence Fund that is providing significant boost in this respect, and we are working on this process with France and always in close cooperation with NATO and in a transparent way. Establishing capabilities and structures is one thing. The other thing is our common desire to actually make use of this military weight, if circumstances so require. So President Macron is perfectly right in telling Europeans that we need une Europe qui protège, Europe that protects its citizens. So we Europeans must be both. We need capabilities, but also political determination. In view of global challenges such as terrorism, poverty, and climate change, Europe must now begin to finally build up momentum. Those who are willing must be able to move ahead without being blocked by individual nations. We have already managed to do this with the launch of PESCO. That's a huge step in the area of defense. When it comes to European foreign policy, we're not yet there yet. When it comes to making controversial decisions, we are always hampered by the need for unanimity. But, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we really need something like PESCO in foreign policy as well. Now is the time to do this. We also need a common strategic culture for Europe. We need a common understanding with respect to our interests, our objectives, our foreign policy instruments. This is the only way for Europe to build up sufficient leverage. When I speak of more independence and self-reliance, This is not just meant in a purely military context. The military is making a major contribution towards managing crises and conflicts. However, there is no such thing as a purely military shortcut leading towards a stable and sustainable peace order. In Europe, we've seen this again and again over many decades, in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, and nowadays in Mali, Syria, and Iraq. Clearly, there are cases where it is necessary to focus on hard military force. In the fight against ISIL terrorism, negotiation attempts would have been futile. The images of the attempted genocide against the Yazidis are burnt into our memories. ISIL does not negotiate. ISIL beheads people. So it was correct to forge the coalition against terrorism. Jointly, we have made sure that ISIL suffered a military defeat. In the long run, however, we can only prevail if in this region, if we manage to establish political and social stability. It is clear that military interventions cannot prevent the radicalization of entire generations of young people. Violent extremism primarily thrives where politics and governance have failed, where poverty, exclusion, and marginalization are the order of the day, where the prospects for the future are so bleak that violence and extremism can seem alluring. This is where we must start if we're serious about taking greater responsibility for our own security. What we need, ladies and gentlemen, what we need is a clear and comprehensive action plan. A plan for comprehensive security. This must be our answer. This approach is also advocated in the new coalition agreement in Germany. So we have broken new ground. We've done something unique. We've decided that in the next 4 years, additional budget funds will be prioritized for 2 fields of action. That is defense and development policy. And by this I mean our NATO target and the ODA ratio. Both areas will be deemed equally important. It is foreseeable that this will result in a considerable increase in funding allocated to both areas in real terms, thanks to our growing economy. For me, as the German Federal Minister of Defense, this is a far-reaching decision, because it means we can continue the trend reversals we started in the Bundeswehr. We need that badly because for 25 years we have been cutting back, and it's impossible to undo that in 2 years. But we'll continue to increase the Bundeswehr personnel strength, we'll continue to invest and modernize. All the investment that were insufficient over 25 years cannot be undone in a couple of years. You need more years to undo that. And we want to pursue an ambitious digitalization strategy within the Bundeswehr. This is our objective for the next decade. With these commitments, Germany has now, for the first time, agreed on a binding pact for comprehensive security in hard currency. Germany stands by its commitments made to the United Nations. And Germany stands by the agreements it has with NATO. Because we are convinced that you cannot have one without the other, security and development. As you all know, if we manage to drive ISIL out of a city, we can only win the hearts and minds of the people by ensuring that water, electricity, and jobs are quickly restored. People need food, they need medical care, they need work. At the same time, aid workers need to know that they are not alone and defenseless. They are protected by our military personnel and by the police force. The aid worker and the soldier need one another. Ladies and gentlemen, When you think about it, this is really the basis of our transatlantic partnership. After the darkest hour in German history, after the Allies' military victory over Nazi Germany, America did not turn its back on us. Instead, they gave us the Marshall Plan. And those were wise men and women who decided to do that, because they understood their own need for security in the long term. And the same is true today. Since Russia's aggression against Ukraine, the United States has once again been increasing its military presence in Europe. Our colleague, Jim Mattis, can take credit for this, and I respect him for that. We Europeans are most grateful for the sign of solidarity. The United States and Canada, that is also involved in enhanced forward presence, we are most grateful to our partners. America is globally committed to pursuing security and freedom for itself and for us. And I'm saying this as the representative of a country that is currently still falling short of its target to spend 2% of its economic output on defense, something the United States has long since been doing. Nevertheless, the basic idea of our joined-up effort, embodied by the Marshall Plan and NATO, is absolutely right. You can't have one without the other. Both, in conjunction, can create lasting stability and security. Therefore, it is a point of concern to us to see that some of our partners continue to roll back spending on diplomacy, international aid, and the United Nations. Do our views really differ so greatly on the importance of combining defense, diplomacy, and aid when it comes to our security? And do our views really differ so much with regard to the importance of the United Nations? As friends and partners, we need to talk openly about this. And this conference is the perfect place to do so. Germany wants to strengthen the United Nations. In the coming years, we are willing to make an even greater contribution to solving the many tasks faced by the United Nations. It is important to us to raise the prestige of this comprehensive approach to security. Security and work, security and climate change, security and health, security and human rights. These key factors go hand in hand. More equality for women, more involvement. These are key factors. If my neighbor is doing well, I am more likely to do well myself. Secretary General Guterres has provided proposals to reform the United Nations, and that is a step in the right direction. As the protector of a rule-based global order, the United Nations must be strengthened, not limited in its options. Yes, it's true the United Nations needs to be reformed, but not weakened. We may not like every resolution, every decision by the United Nations, and yes, it's true that sometimes it's very frustrating when the Security Council blocks itself because of vetoes. But ladies and gentlemen, let us not forget, we are the United Nations. The UN is only as strong as we make it. We have all learned some tough lessons from the refugee crisis. We must strengthen organizations like UNHCR, the World Food Programme, and the Children's Fund UNICEF. We must strengthen them in order to break the cycle of hopelessness and desperation leading to radicalization and violence right in our neighborhood. The discussions over the last few months have shown that transatlantic burden sharing cannot consist of a model under which some are responsible for the sharp end of the stick, while others deal with humanitarian measures and reconstruction. No, all of us are responsible for both aspects, for both sides of the coin. And this must become a guiding principle on both sides of the Atlantic. And if we do this, our transatlantic partnership will retain its strategic strength, the strength it has always had over the past decades. Just to be quite clear, we Europeans must make huge efforts if we are to meet this self-imposed demand. But our American friends, too, have a precious obligation which goes beyond military matters alone. Just consider this. What use is it to family in Mosul to be freed from terror and then they starve to death? What use is it to a farmer in Mali to install an irrigation system and then he's slaughtered by terrorists? What use is it to a young woman in Afghanistan, in Kabul maybe, to finish her law degree and then she just hits a wall of discrimination and corruption? What does it mean that the average age in Europe is 43, in the United States 38 years, and the average age in Niger is 14? We can imagine what our children will be faced with in the future, and we sense the responsibility we bear now to ensure that their tasks will not be insurmountable. Ladies and gentlemen, if Germany, as a stable democracy, does not hide behind its past, but accepts that its military must fight for freedom and security, and they must be well equipped to do so. If countries see international aid not just as an optional extra that's like nice to have, but as something they can't afford not to give. In other words, if security and development are no longer seen as a contradiction, but if soldiers, police, teachers, doctors and lawyers plan and work together, if national self-interest no longer prevails, but a cooperative world order, only then, I'm sure our children may one day say to us, "You used your time well." Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. We will have some Q&A afterwards, but we have decided to listen to the French Minister of Defense first, and then we have a joint Q&A session. Madame le Ministre, you have the floor.
Madame la Ministre, Mesdames et Messieurs, chère Ursula, merci beaucoup de...
Minister, dear Ursula, ich höre Sie nicht. It's great that we have come here together for this festival of exchanging ideas. I'm here on this podium. It's no coincidence, as we have heard, that Ursula should share this panel with me. It has been very generous. But, of course, another reason is that we share the same foundations, the same underlying reasons. Are there two nations that are much more integrated than our two? The River Rhine has become just a river, no longer a border. We have joint cabinet meetings. Our political leaders are constantly in contact. Our industries are merging, and our armed forces are deployed to the same theaters. We have joint brigades, joint aircraft, joint helicopters. And on the 13th of July last year, we decided that we will have in the future joint drones, joint tubes, and joint fighter aircraft. And imagine, in the next couple of months, we will see a further intensification of this great partnership. How do two nations get closer to each other? Their values, their vision, their shared targets, the shared history, but also the threats we face. And there is certainly no lack in threats. I don't want to give you a scary list of all the threats we are faced with. You know that much better than anybody else. But I think we should stop and pause for a moment, because this is really the backdrop against all our action. And this is also our ultimate responsibility vis-à-vis our citizens. Let us remind us of the year 2000. We embarked on an aircraft as if it were just a bus. Since 2001, we have been searched, body searched like a criminal at the airports. And we remember that in 2014, military in Paris was only seen on the 14th of July. But after this year, in 2015, there are thousands and thousands of air forces, of armed forces now patrolling the cities and the villages of our country. In 2000, we thought that the internet would be a space of prosperity, and in 2017, it was a single IT attack that cost a French company millions of euros. Let's remember that the South China Sea was just a group of little islands, and in 2018, it is a quagmire of destroyers that are traveling the area. In 2013, the Ukraine believed in Europe, and soon afterwards it was dismembered. In 1989, we believed that on the ruins of the Berlin Wall, we would see a universal horizon of democracy. But 15 years later, there were IT manipulations, attempts to interfere with elections of several countries, free countries. The democracy, the bastion of our liberties, became the target of subversion. What has happened to the certitudes that we sort of dreamed in over the last 15 years? The inviolability of borders, the peace dividend, a vanishing nuclear threat, the cohesion of our societies, the integrity of our democracies. The power centers are moving in a direction that is not the direction of liberal democracies. We have an increasing risk of global confrontation. The alliances have their aspirations, but we, the old, robust Europeans, still have to take a serious look at ourselves. So let's do it. Our alliance with the United States, especially in NATO, are indispensable given the latest developments, and we must do everything we can to promote them. But above all, and this is my second deliberation in this new world that is just being born, Europe is not a nice to have, it is a must. Europe, that is a word charged with meaning and with many dreams. It is the word of the builders and the visionaries, but we gave up this word. We left it to the bureaucrats, the tyranny of consensus, the passion for procedures. If an organization thinks it is normal to live only and communicate only with verbal notes, with silence procedures, and with non-papers, I think we have a problem. It is time to wake up. This beautiful word, Europe, this is something that we have to revive. But we must be clear about one thing. Europe, that starts at home. Just like a healthy European economy begins with a robust national economy, a robust European defense will start with, or needs to start with, efforts at home. This is why Emmanuel Macron, shortly after having been elected, decided to give our defense all the needs, the means that they need, and he has stated very clearly the French objective, and that is to spend 2% of our GDP on defense by 2025. This is a huge financial effort. And last week, I started with the implementation of this effort with a military programming law allocating 300 billion euros to defense until 2025. We want to increase our efforts. We want to take up new armaments projects, modernize and upgrade our material. We want to make our organization more agile, and we want to take a new course when it comes to innovation. But Europe is also a passion that we share, and Ursula just rightly reminded us that we have made huge progress over the last couple of months. PESCO is something that we have been taken up and now filled with life, and the European Defence Fund really marks a cultural revolution in Brussels. And we hope that this will be followed by a huge leap forward. And there may be more projects. Maybe one day, I already talked about dreams, maybe the general direction competition will allow European industrial giants to establish. Maybe one day we will be able to move forward. By voting for Emmanuel Macron, the French sent a clear message. We wanted to revive the European idea. They wanted to reject fatalism and populism. And the recently signed coalition contract in Germany puts Europe at its heart. So we hope that new chapters will be opened for the European defense. In his speech at the Sorbonne, Emmanuel Macron talked about the Initiative for Europe, and I think this is exactly the course we have to embark upon. We must not accept the straitjackets that are still existing, but we must focus on concrete projects and initiatives. We must further develop our institutions. The success of European defense does not depend on the institutions, but it will come from new missions and operations. This is why I would like to briefly talk about the European Intervention Initiative that we have proposed. What does it stand for? It is about developing a joint strategic culture among Europeans. Those who wish to and are capable of should be ready when they want to deploy. This must not be a concept, but it should be practical work. We are not starting from zero. at the center of planning and operations in Paris, from where France commands all its operations abroad, there are maybe a dozen of European liaison officers. And this is a real symbol because this is the objective we are heading for. We need to share a situational awareness, same understanding of the crises. We need a common threat analysis. We need a shared feeling of urgency and a shared action plan. So this is really an important work we are doing there. The ability to deploy together, this goes really hand in hand and is in line with the PESCO initiative because it is basically the same philosophy that they follow. And it is also coherent with NATO. It was always a reality that some countries, because of their national decisions, were better able or more resolved in taking action. But this capability is also a tool for the Europeans, a possibility for the Europeans to accept more burden. Those who have read well the US national security strategy will have noticed that they are refocusing on the biggest threats. That's legitimate, but what does it mean for us Europeans? If we are threatened from our immediate neighborhood, in particular from the south, then we must be able to face these threats, even if the United Nations or the alliance want to get less involved. And this is why we need our own autonomous strategy in the best sense of the term. In other words, our capability to intervene without having to call the United States to rush to our sick bed, to have them relocate their ISR means or their logistics support from other theaters. So the European Intervention Initiative can be a facilitator. To us, it was important that this initiative should not depend neither from the EU nor NATO procedures, because the abilities, but also the habitudes that have been developed in this framework shall benefit both organizations. The security of Europe is indivisible. It's not either EU or NATO. This is the wrong debate. We need to concentrate on the threats of today and of tomorrow. So we need to enable those who want to act and can act. So let's look into the future. Let's look at the new possible areas of confrontation, space and cyber. These are areas where I intend to spend a lot of money on. And it is important that we should be able to master these technologies because they are really the future capabilities that we need. I have such a renowned audience of strategists in front of me here, so I think we should even try to look beyond the horizon. It's not enough to prepare the wars of tomorrow. We have to think of those the day after tomorrow. One example that is very dear to my heart is the environmental safety and security. Not surprising from a nation who has the motto, make our planet great again. But we must really see and assess the importance, the droughts that we have seen, the floods, the rising oceans, dying of the corals. These are not just natural events or man-made ones, they are also military events. They are drawing a new map. They increase tensions, they displace people, they create new fault lines, new conflicts. We have an area of preventive environmental protection in which France will invest a lot. So we need to be cautious, but we need also need to act. So you should know that France stands ready for the conflicts of today, tomorrow, and the day after. Hand in hand with Germany, we will defend the values of liberty and openness that are at the essence of our shared identity. Thank you.
I'd like to thank both ministers, and now we have almost 20 minutes for questions and answers. While you are considering what to ask, I would like to take this opportunity and ask a question each to both ministers. Let me start with a question to Ms. von der Leyen. What do you think when you listen to the severe criticism leveled by the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the German Bundestag? He criticized the poor equipment and the poor state of training of the armed forces, and he voiced that criticism in public. So what is your reaction? And I also have a question to the French Minister of Defense. The plans for even closer Franco-German and European cooperation are ambitious ones. And certainly many of us will be enthusiastic about these plans. However, what do you in Paris think about the reliability of a German partner? And I'm not talking about joint procurement and joint exercises or training, but also joint operations, common operations. How reliable do you think your partner is while we still have the principle in Germany that Parliament decides about mandates? Is that not a continuous question mark for a working relationship in times of crisis? Ms. von der Leyen. Yes, let me start. Because of the fact, and that is important to mention, we have a parliamentary army in Germany to make sure that the equipment and everything about the Bundeswehr has to be decided by Parliament. So for this reason, I took this as support. I took this criticism you mentioned as support because it means we are clear that something needs to happen. We need more investment in the next years, and we need to increase that investment. So this is how I took this criticism, and I'm happy to take this on board. It is true. We have seen and still see the consequences since the reunification of Germany more than 25 years ago. We have seen that we have always cut back funds for the armed forces, and we spent less than we should have in order to modernize and maintain our equipment. So now a quarter of a century has passed, and now we can see the crises that I mentioned at the beginning. When I started as a foreign minister, the Minister of Defense, the only issue was Afghanistan. We didn't have Iraq. The Mali crisis only just started. We didn't have the refugee crisis. We didn't have the Mediterranean crisis yet. We did not have the change of behavior on the part of Russia. So all these issues are relatively new. So all that hit a Bundeswehr which had gone through 25 years of cutbacks, and now all of a sudden it had to do more. It's not surprising that it's difficult to do that and that problems occur. And that shows us that the decision we took years ago to reverse the trend, to reinvest, to increase our spending, that this decision must be upheld in future, and we must continue along this path. I have another thing to say that is important for Parliament. 2 years ago, I think it was, I presented a plan to Parliament which covered 130 billion to be spent by the year 2030. And it states what must be invested where if we want to make sure that our military is equipped in a way that enables them to fulfill the missions that we place on their shoulders. So this is a foreseeable plan, and of course, that's the way it is in politics. We need to fight over these funds again and again, but I'm optimistic. Thank you very much. A couple of weeks ago, and I'll come back to the answer in a minute, a couple of weeks ago, the German ambassador to France voiced a very nice idea. He invited us and other representatives, and to discuss the future. Of course, and I said, of course, Germans will never be French, and the French will never be German. His reaction to this statement was very clear. But what I wanted to say is we are not identical, we are not the same. And because we're not the same, that does not mean we cannot be complementary, we cannot complement each other. And this complementary element is something we can see every day in many fields. For example, when it comes to operations, since the beginning of the year we have been on an operation together. That's enhanced forward presence in Europe. And there we work together. We have a common battalion. In Africa, in Niger, which is a difficult terrain, we cooperate as well. We went there together, you and me. Germany supports the armed forces there with tactical transport, helicopters. And there, the contribution made by Germany is indispensable. Germany is very involved in MINUSMA as well. When it comes to industry, we cooperate closely as well. We have a joint enterprise, KMW and Exeter, and that is important. After the Franco-German summit of the 13th of July last year, we decided to intensify our cooperation, and that includes a joint project for a joint fighter aircraft, but also by developing a joint main battle tank, which is to succeed Leclerc and the Leopard. So you can see that cooperation is not something that is imposed from above. It's something you have to live every day. The same goes for trust. You need to build it step by step. And you can build it when you have a friend, a partner at your side that supports you, a partner with whom you can create new projects together. And this is a road along which we must continue and even tackle larger projects. What could be a more ambitious project between two countries than the joint development of a battle system? Is there any more important key to success than such a project? So again, we are not the same, but we complement each other.
Now is the time for you to ask questions. If you have a question, please be so kind as to identify yourself. I know many of you, but I don't know all of you. Please also indicate whether your question is directed to both or only to one of the two speakers. I saw my old friend François Heisbourg in the back. So François, you're first. He's always the first.
This is a real surprise, Wolfgang.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much to both of you. It is a great moment to see France and Germany speak together, and furthermore with two persons of your quality, if I may say so. Je vais poser ma question en français. Vous parlez toutes les deux très bien français et je...
You've both shown that you speak French very well, but I'll ask my question in French. I'd like to ask Ms. von der Leyen, but I assume that Ms. Parly will also want to react. Minister von der Leyen, in your presentation, you mentioned the necessity of a joint strategic culture. You said that security must be inclusive, the way of tackling it must be inclusive, and I can only support you so far. So, of course, I applauded, as many others did. However, I wonder whether in foreign policy we need something like PESCO. You said that too. And I do have a few doubts there. PESCO has just been started. All European countries of the joint foreign and security policy joined, apart from Malta. And of course, that's a good thing. There's a lot of support for this new initiative. However, we do not know what the result of this permanent cooperation will be. Is it not a bit audacious to present PESCO as a model for foreign policy? Even now, we haven't seen any results yet, and we don't know yet if PESCO will in fact be suitable for foreign policy.
So who is the next one? I see someone over there in the corner. Yes, gentlemen. Is this Herr Kiesewetter? Yeah.
Yes, it's me. Yeah. Meine Frage, danke, Herr Botschafter.
Thank you, Ambassador. My question is to Madame la Ministre, Madame Parly. I have a question about European intervention initiative that you mentioned, and you described this initiative and PESCO as two sides of the same coin. You also mentioned European armaments industry. And my question is, Germany would like to harmonize armaments exports at the European level. What do you think about this proposal? Would you be willing to accept the strict rules we have in Germany?
Questions which have been handed to me, and one of them is also directed to Madame Parly. This question comes from Karl Kaiser. Where are you, Karl? Way back. Die muss ich jetzt auf Deutsch vorlesen.
I've got to read this out in German. Is it conceivable for the French force de frappe to be granted a European function while preserving the right of decision-making for France? And another question by Edward Lucas.
Question to both of you. How should deterrence work in the 21st century? Wider? I can't read this. Can you say this, Edward? What is this? I can't read your handwriting.
So the question is how next generation deterrence should look, wider than just reliance on nuclear weapons, maybe including financial deterrence, like very rapid financial sanctions. Maybe that would be more credible, and it's somewhere where the EU and NATO can work together.
This is an interesting question. Edward has recently spoken about SNAP exercises, not by the classic military, but SNAP exercises to impose economic financial sanctions in a major way. Isn't that right? I think that's the question. So, who wants to go first?
Je vais peut-être commencer par
Let me start with the question of arms exports. I know this is a subject which is very sensitive here in Germany, very much under discussion. So let me briefly remind you of a few principles. The first principle: in France and in Germany, there is no mechanism for arms exports which is not extremely strict. So anyone who says the contrary is not really helpful in informing our population. Of course, I'm most aware of, most familiar with the French procedure here. There is a council comprising several ministries, and then a decision is made taking into account numerous criteria. For example, equipment. The equipment in question can only be used in line with international treaties and agreements. We have never hesitated to refuse permission for such projects. It happens all the time. And if the situation demands it, it is also possible to withdraw permission already given. And then these projects are not implemented. Another remark. The armaments industry, as well as other branches of industry, must consolidate themselves. We Europeans are extremely fragmented right now. So one day, if we were to produce just for ourselves without exporting anything, we would be faced with a stark reality. We wouldn't have the capacities to do this. So, in other words, arms exports must be handled according to very strict rules, but they should not be presented as a specter. It is a difficult, complicated subject, but it is necessary. Now let me talk about PESCO. PESCO in foreign policy matters. Maybe my colleague should talk about that first. Let me just say, PESCO, a foreign policy PESCO, is really in its infancy right now. But we have made major steps forwards. Of course, it is way too early to draw conclusions. But those of us who have more experience in this matter than I do, and who are more far-sighted, they tell me that the progress we've made in several months can create a dynamic of its own, a dynamic that would have been inconceivable a couple of years ago. Together, Europeans have understood that they must take joint action against terrorism. And this has led to the mechanism that we have now in the European Union, which is sometimes a bit complicated, but it has been implemented well by means of PESCO, this new initiative that was presented a couple of months ago. By the end of March, we will select certain projects which will then be pursued at European level, and that is quite an achievement. Quite an important step forward. Please don't forget that. And there will be a second wave of proposals which are to be presented by the end of the year. Of course, there have been many discussions about what is to happen in the next few years, but what is really remarkable is that this is a pragmatic way forward, because it is based on concrete projects. So it is too early to draw conclusions, but I am confident. I'd like to answer in German. That's easier for me. Now, about the question, what could be a kind of PESCO for European foreign policy? What has happened? We have the defense union has already been mentioned in the Lisbon Treaty, but then it remained dormant for 10 years. But now think of the word never waste a good crisis. We are in the middle of a crisis now. Think of the Brexit referendum. Think of the tension within the European Union. At the height of the refugee crisis, we were faced with challenges presented by the new US administration. These were new challenges. That was the wake-up call we needed to understand. We need to change things. We need to become more self-sufficient. So what did we change? First of all, France and Germany worked hard to develop a step towards PESCO, and very soon it became apparent that other countries wanted to participate and they were included. The good thing about PESCO is it has to be decided by a qualified majority. So this is the political framework. But the contents is certain projects where we are determined to advance quicker. Then there's no longer the need for unanimity, but we still work together. In European foreign policy, if we want to achieve something, if we want to be heard and felt, we must be quick. We must take quick action, come up with quick results. And that also goes for foreign policy. And I'm not talking about the same thing as PESCO, but something similar as PESCO. That's what we need for foreign policy, to make sure that when Europe is called upon to act, we can answer with one voice. The second question was about deterrence. We will always need a certain degree of military strength to make sure nobody would risk attacking even a square centimeter of the alliance territory. But the question, shouldn't we have a more differentiated approach? As far as financial instruments are concerned, I'm not an expert here. But of course, your question reminded me of something else. How can we face a global threat such as IS terror? And there, from the start, we have always included financial elements. In the beginning, ISIL was rich, but we dried out this flow of money supporting them. We built up strategic communication. We included other elements. It would go too far to discuss all that here, but it serves to show that you can use all these elements to fend off an existing danger. When it comes to deterrence, we need even more variation. We need more elements, not just military elements, even though they are necessary.
Conclude this session, and we need to conclude it now. We're running into overtime already. I want to remind you that as this panel concludes, there is no intermission. This panel will be followed immediately by two very important statements, one from the Secretary General of the United Nations and the next one from His Highness the Emir of Qatar. So don't try to get some coffee now. There's time for that later. There's going to be a coffee break sometime later. Let me conclude this session and invite all of you to give our two panelists a warm hand. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.